You want a home? And we need a bride for our father. What kind of sorrow drives a woman to wander the frontier with nothing but hunger and shame? What heartbreak left her believing she was too broken, too forgotten to ever be loved again? And yet could those trembling words from two little girls open a door to a life she never dared to dream of? The train had long since passed through Dust Hollow, leaving behind nothing but a whisper of smoke and the clatter of wheels fading into the horizon. The platform creaked under the weight of silence. Wind tugged at shawls and bonnets carrying dust that settled in every crease of skin, every crack of wood. Clara stood there, a worn satchel clutched close to her chest. 50 winters had carved lines into her face, and though her shoulders sagged beneath years of hardship, her back remained straight. She had learned long ago that dignity was sometimes the only possession one could carry when all else was stripped away. The innkeeper had turned her away the night before. No coin, no bed, he'd set his eyes sliding over her like she was less than the floorboards he stood on. She had slept in the station's corner instead, half dozing, while mice scurried near her skirts. The bruises on her wrist faded, but still there were ghosts of a life she did not name aloud. People had taken enough from her. She would not give them her story too. The townsfolk moved past with baskets and ledgers, eyes fixed anywhere but her. To them she was another widow lost in the shuffle of a hard land. Invisible, disposable. Then from behind a wooden post, two small faces appeared. Twin girls' hair braided unevenly, dresses, patched but clean. They studied Clara with the kind of serious courage only children carry. The taller one, her eyes like storm-gray skies, stepped forward first. "You want a home, don't you?" she asked, her voice both timid and steady. The smaller one clutched a folded scrap of paper, creased and smudged. We need a bride for our father." For a moment, Clara could only stare. The words were strange, almost laughable, except there was no laughter in their faces, only need. They pressed the paper into her palm. The handwriting was uneven, a child's scrawl with letters wandering across the page. "If you find someone kind, bring her home to us. Thomas Hale." Her throat tightened. Kind. It had been years since anyone had used that word with her. The twins reached for her hands, their small fingers curling around hers. Their palms were warm against the chill of autumn air. Clara looked down the dirt road they pointed to toward the line of cottonwoods that swayed in the distance. Her satchel was nearly empty, her heart even more so. Yet something in those children's eyes, desperation mingled with a hope too fragile to ignore, pulled her forward. She did not know their father nor what awaited at the end of that road, but she knew what it was to be hungry for safety, for belonging. And so she took a step. The twins smiled, relief softening their young faces. One whispered as if it were a secret too precious to say aloud, "You'll come, won't you?" Clara nodded, though her voice trembled. "Yes, I'll come." For the first time in a long while, she felt not entirely invisible. A home, could it truly begin with the invitation of two children? The dirt road stretched longer than Clara imagined, each step carrying her deeper into uncertainty. The twins skipped beside her, their energy a strange counterpoint to her measured, careful gait. Dust clung to her boots, and with every gust of wind she felt as though the prairie itself was asking whether she had the strength to keep moving forward. "Papa says the land listens," the taller girl explained, brushing hair from her eyes. "If you're gentle, it gives back." Clara glanced at her, noting the way her small chin jutted proudly like she was repeating a lesson memorized by heart. The smaller one nodded solemnly, adding, "He says mamas make houses feel like homes. That's why we asked you." Their innocence made Clara's heart ache. She wanted to ask where their mother was, why their father needed strangers to fill the hollow, but she pressed the questions down. Pain sat too close beneath the surface. By the time the cottonwoods parted, a ranch unfolded before them. Fences leaned tiredly, the barn carried scars of old storms, and the farmhouse stood plain, but sturdy, smoke trailing faintly from its chimney. On the porch sat Thomas Hale. Broad-shouldered, weather-worn, his shirt sleeves rolled to reveal arms shaped by years of labor. He wasn't young. His hair showed strands of gray, but his presence carried a quiet strength. He rose when he saw them approach, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in Clara's worn shawl, her guarded stance, the bruises she had tried to hide. For a moment she thought he might turn her away like so many others had. But then the twins ran forward, tugging at his hands. "Papa, we found her." His gaze rested on Clara again, not dismissive, not pitying, simply searching. After a long pause, he nodded once, his voice deep and steady. "You've walked far. Come inside." The farmhouse smelled of wood smoke and bread, simple grounding scents that wrapped around Clara like an unexpected embrace. She set her satchel near the door, feeling both welcomed and out of place all at once. Over supper, silence stretched between them. The twins chattered about chores and the creek where they played, filling the spaces their father and Clara left empty. Thomas listened quietly, his rough hands steady on the table. At last he spoke. "You've no reason to trust me, but the girls, they've chosen you, and I don't take their hopes lightly." His eyes met hers, calm but unyielding. "Stay as long as you wish. Work if you're able. No one here will own you." The words caught Clara off guard. No one here will own you. For years, men had spoken of women as possessions, bargains, duties, burdens. To hear the opposite felt almost dangerous, as though hope might unravel her if she held it too tightly. She lowered her gaze, hands folded in her lap. "I've been many things, Mr. Hale. Useful, obedient, unwanted. But never free." Thomas did not flinch. Instead, he leaned back, his tone firm but kind. "Then perhaps it's time you were." The room fell into a soft quiet again. The fire crackled, the girls' laughter carried faintly from the next room. And in the stillness, Clara felt something shift, not safety, not yet, but the faint possibility of belonging. Could a stranger's porch be the first step toward freedom? The days settled into rhythm. At dawn, Clara rose with the creak of the farmhouse floorboards, her hands finding tasks almost by instinct, stirring porridge, hanging damp linens in the rising light, mending tiny socks and skirts with stitches she had practiced since girlhood. The twins' laughter filled the house in a way that startled her at first, sharp bursts of joy she hadn't heard in years. Yet beneath it all, silence pressed against her chest. She carried it like an invisible shawl, heavier than any cloth. When Thomas Hale returned from the fields each evening, dust trailing his boots, his presence filled the doorway. He nodded politely, asked brief questions. Was the firewood stacked? Did the girls mind their lessons? And then sat quietly by the hearth. His words were few, but his gaze was steady, respectful. Clara noticed that he never reached for her, never demanded anything. That alone unsettled her, as though she were waiting for a blow that never came. One afternoon, while she kneaded bread, the smaller twin Anna slipped into the kitchen. She pressed a crumpled flower into Clara's palm. "Papa says the land listens, but I think you do too." Then she darted away before Clara could reply. The words lingered, stirring places in Clara's heart she had locked away. She longed to believe she was more than a shadow passing through someone else's story. But memories of the past clawed at her, the men who saw her as property, the family who bartered her future as if it were a sack of grain, the nights when she whispered to herself that endurance was the only virtue left. That evening, Thomas lingered at the table longer than usual. The fire's glow softened his face, tracing lines carved by both grief and endurance. "You don't talk much," he said at last. Clara stiffened, the old defense rising in her throat, but his tone carried no judgment, only quiet observation. "No," she answered, her voice low. "Talking rarely changed what was done to me." Thomas leaned back, his eyes dark with something unspoken. "Maybe so, but sometimes talking changes what comes next." The silence between them deepened, not cold, but weighted like earth before a storm. Clara's fingers trembled against her apron. She wanted to speak, to let her story spill into the quiet, but fear choked her. What if her scars disgusted him? What if her truth drove away the fragile home she had begun to feel under this roof? She excused herself, retreating to the small room the girls had prepared for her. Behind the door, she pressed her forehead to the rough wood and let a tear slip down. She had thought silence kept her safe. But here, among children who saw her as comfort and a man who treated her with respect, silence was beginning to feel like a prison. Outside, she heard Thomas's boots crossing the porch, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to his horses. The sound steadied her, somehow reminding her that she was no longer alone, though loneliness still lived inside her. That night, lying on the narrow bed, Clara whispered to the darkness, "If freedom is real, Let me be brave enough to claim it. For the first time in decades, her prayer did not feel foolish. But could Clara ever find the courage to let her silence break? The next days were heavy with unspoken words. Clara carried them like stones in her pockets, weighed down each time she saw the twins glance at her, as if waiting for something more than porridge and patched skirts. Children could sense what adults hid. Their laughter dimmed when they felt her sadness press against the walls. One evening a storm rolled over the plains. Wind rattled the shutters, rain lashed the roof, and thunder shook the timbers of the old house. The girls clung to Clara as she lit the lamp, her steady hands calming their fear. Yet inside she trembled. Storms had always reminded her of nights long ago when she had no safe arms to run to, no one who called her worth keeping. When the storm quieted into steady rain, Clara stepped outside onto the porch. The land smelled of wet earth, sharp and clean. Thomas was there, his broad frame outlined against the fading light. He didn't speak at first. He only stood beside her, the silence stretching, not hostile, but thick with things unsaid. Finally he asked, "Do storms scare you?" Clara hesitated. Then before fear could stop her, she said, "They remind me of men who broke more than bones. I've carried the bruises in places no one can see. That's why I keep silent. Because once you speak it out loud, you can't take it back." Thomas turned toward her slowly. His face was unreadable, but his eyes softened. "Clara," he said quietly, "nothing you carry will make you less in this house. Not to me, not to the girls. Sometimes silence keeps you alive, but it doesn't let you live." The words cracked something inside her. Her hands knotted at her apron, began to shake. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one she felt inside: years of humiliation, betrayal, loneliness. It rose like a flood, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I'm not clean. I was told I'm ruined, that no man would ever want me." The rain tapped steadily on the roof, as if the world itself was listening. Thomas's jaw tightened, his voice low but steady. "Whoever told you that lied. You are not ruined. You're standing here raising children that aren't even yours, cooking meals, holding a home together. That isn't ruin, that's strength." Clara felt the tears she had held back for so long break free. She pressed a hand to her face, ashamed to let him see. But Thomas reached out, not to touch her, only to let his hand hover near hers. "You don't have to carry those words anymore," he murmured. The twins peeked from the doorway, then their eyes wide. "Papa," one of them whispered, "is Miss Clara crying?" Clara quickly wiped her cheeks, forcing a smile. But Thomas answered gently, "Yes, and that's all right. Sometimes crying is what lets the hurt leave." The girls patted over, climbing into Clara's lap as if it were the most natural place to be. Their small hands pressed against her arms, their heads against her shoulder. Clara held them, the warmth of their trust, unraveling something she thought was lost forever. In that moment, the silence broke not with shouts, but with truth. And though she still felt raw and exposed, Clara knew a door had opened. A door that could lead her not just into survival, but into belonging. But would Clara truly believe she was worthy of the love now being offered, or retreat back into the safety of silence? The morning after the storm, the prairie gleamed fresh, every blade of grass jeweled with raindrops. Inside the farmhouse, the air was still heavy with Clara's confession from the night before. She moved quietly through the rooms, setting bread to rise, fetching water, mending hems, but every motion was haunted by the words she had spoken, "I'm not clean." At the breakfast table, the twins chattered about the swollen creek, asking if they could sail sticks down its rushing current. Clara smiled faintly, but her heart was elsewhere. She kept her gaze low, afraid of meeting Thomas's eyes, afraid of seeing pity or worse, disgust. But Thomas said nothing to shame her. He ate simply, then pushed his chair back, his boots steady on the wood floor. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "walk with me a while." They left the farmhouse behind, the girls waving after them. The path curved along the edge of the pasture where cattle grazed, and the air smelled of wet earth and clover. Clara's hands twisted in her shawl. At last, Thomas stopped near the fence line. He turned to her, his expression serious but not harsh. "I saw the fear in your eyes last night, but I also saw your strength. You've survived more than most folks could imagine." Clara's lips trembled. She had lived half a lifetime hearing the opposite, that she was weak, ruined, unworthy. "You don't know," she whispered, her voice catching. "You don't know what they did, how they marked me. If you saw, her voice broke. She gripped the edge of the fence, fighting back tears. Thomas didn't step closer. Instead, he removed his hat, holding it against his chest, his eyes steady on hers. Then show me, he said gently. If you choose. Not because you owe me anything, but because secrets lose their power when they're dragged into the light. Clara froze, her heart pounding. She wanted to run to bury her scars beneath silence, as she always had. But his words were not a demand, they were an invitation, a choice. And choices were something she had been denied for too long. With trembling hands, she loosened the shawl from around her shoulders, then untied the cloth she kept wrapped tight across her chest and arms. Beneath faded scars crisscrossed her skin, some jagged, others like burns. A map of cruelty carved into her body. Her breath came shallow, shame hot in her cheeks. She waited for him to recoil, but Thomas did not move away. His face did pale, yes, but only with grief. His voice broke as he whispered, God help me. What they did to you. He shook his head, pressing a hand over his mouth, as though the sight was almost too much to bear. Not because she was ruined, but because he could not fathom such cruelty. Clara's tears spilled freely. She braced herself for rejection. But then slowly Thomas reached out, not to touch the scars, but to place his hand gently over hers on the fence rail. His grip was firm, grounding. You're not unclean, he said, voice steady now. You are alive. You are more than what they tried to take. And if you'll let me, Clara, I'll stand beside you until you believe it too. Her sobs came hard, then raw and unrestrained. Yet for the first time they did not hollow her out, they cleansed. She felt the truth of his words sink deep like rain, soaking into dry earth. Could Clara truly accept Thomas's promise, or would her old wounds pull her back into fear? The days that followed carried a new kind of heaviness. The silence between Clara and Thomas was not empty. It was full, heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. The girls noticed it, though they didn't quite understand. They clung to Clara even more, their little hands finding hers, their laughter stitched with worry. Word traveled fast in small towns, and the neighboring folks had begun whispering about the widow who had suddenly taken up at Thomas Hale's ranch. Clara knew the looks well, the long glances that measured a woman's worth by the cut of her dress, the curve of her body, or the secrets they thought they knew. Some looks carried pity, others were sharp as barbed wire. One afternoon, Thomas hitched the wagon for a supply run to town. Clara hesitated at the door, shawl clutched around her shoulders. Perhaps I should stay behind, she said quietly. People will talk. Thomas met her gaze, his own steady. People will always talk, Clara. But you don't have to hide. So she went. The streets of the small frontier town bustled with Saturday trade horses tied outside the general store. Children darting between wagons, women gathered near the mercantile, gossiping with quick tongues. As Clara stepped down from the wagon, conversations faltered. Eyes turned toward her, lingering too long on the scarf at her throat, the way she held herself slightly apart. Isn't that the one, a voice hissed from a porch corner. The widow, they say, was passed from man to man. Clara's cheeks burned, her fingers tightening on her shawl. She wanted to vanish into the earth. But Thomas was beside her, his hands steady at her back, not pushing, simply there, strong and sure. He ignored the whispers speaking to her, as if no one else existed. We'll fetch flour nails and the medicine for Anna's cough. Nothing more, nothing less. Inside the store, the merchant glanced at Clara with raised brows but said nothing. Thomas conducted his business calmly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who would not entertain cruelty. Yet when they stepped back outside, a man leaning against a post spat tobacco into the dirt and sneered. Hale, you've taken in damaged goods. Couldn't find a proper wife? The words cut sharper than knives. Clara froze, shame washing over her like cold water. But Thomas turned his jaw tight, his voice low, but carrying across the street. That woman is stronger than any man here. She's raising children that aren't her own, working from dawn till dark, and she's endured more than cowards like you could stomach for a day. If you can't speak respect, you'd best keep your mouth shut. The man faltered, startled by the steel in Thomas's tone. He muttered something and slunk away, the crowd dispersing under the weight of Thomas's glare. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but not of shame, this time of something startlingly close to pride. On the ride home, the silence between them was softer. Clara's voice shook as she said, "You didn't have to defend me." Thomas glanced at her, his expression firm. "Yes, Clara, I did. And I will every time. You're not alone anymore." The prairie rolled out before them, endless and untamed, but for the first time in years, Clara did not feel lost in it. She felt anchored. Still deep inside, the old voice lingered, the one that told her she was unworthy, ruined, unlovable. Could she silence it long enough to believe what Thomas saw in her? That night she stood by the window of the small room watching the stars prick the dark sky. The twins' soft breathing filled the house. Thomas sat downstairs, boots propped by the fire. Clara pressed her hand to the glass, whispering to herself, "Could I really belong here?" The answer didn't come from the stars, but from the steady warmth that filled the home. Would Clara's heart finally accept the love standing in front of her? Or would her past always chain her to shame? The autumn air grew crisp, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke and harvest. Leaves along the cottonwoods shivered gold, whispering that the world could indeed turn from one season to another, no matter how long the winter. For Clara, it felt as though her own heart was trying to follow suit, struggling to believe in a spring after decades of cold. Life at the ranch settled into something steady. Each morning she rose before dawn to cook breakfast, her hands busy while the twins rubbed sleep from their eyes. Their small voices now called her Mama Clara, without hesitation, a name that both warmed and broke her heart. She had never thought she'd be anyone's mother, let alone to two girls who clung to her skirts like she was safety itself. Thomas grew gentler in his presence. He was still a man of few words, but Clara noticed the way his eyes softened when he caught her humming over the wash, the way he lingered on the porch steps when she read to the girls in the evenings. He never rushed her, never asked for more than she could give, and it was in that patience that something fragile yet fierce began to bloom. One night after the girls had gone to bed, Clara sat at the table mending a sleeve. Her stitches wavered as her thoughts drifted. She finally looked across at Thomas, who sat by the fire, whittling a piece of wood into something shapeless. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Why do you look at me as if I'm whole when you've seen what I carry?" Thomas set the wood aside and leaned forward, his rough hands clasped together. "Because, Clara, I don't see what was done to you. I see the woman who kept walking anyway. The woman who held on to dignity when others tried to strip it away. That's worth more than any clean slate." Clara's tears spilled, but they were different this time, not the old tears of shame, but ones of release. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe his words. She stood, and with trembling steps crossed to him. "Thomas," she whispered, "I don't have much left to give." He rose, meeting her eyes. "Then give me only what you can. That's enough." In the quiet that followed, he reached for her hand, nothing more. And in that gentle act, Clara felt something unshackle within her. She was no longer the woman defined by bruises, by silence, by what others had taken. She was a woman being chosen freely for herself. The following Sunday, whispers in town flared again when Thomas walked into church with Clara on his arm and the twins skipping at their heels. But for once, Clara held her head high. Let them whisper. She knew who she was now and whose love had finally found her. That night after the girls were asleep, Clara stepped outside and looked over the land, the stars spread vast above her. She whispered to the dark, "I am not ruined. I am home." And somewhere in the stillness, it felt as if the earth itself whispered back, "Yes, you belong." But as Clara finally stepped into love, was this the ending of her long sorrow, or the beginning of a new chapter she had never dared dream? In the end, this story was never just about a homeless widow or two little girls in worn boots. It was about what happens when broken lives meet, when loneliness is met not with pity, but with an open hand, and when love arrives in forms we never expected. The widow thought her worth had long been stolen by years of rejection and hardship. The children thought they had lost the chance for a mother's touch. But in the quiet honesty of need, they found one another, and together they began to build a home that was stronger than despair. Life, too, offers us moments like these. Times when we believe the best has already passed, when sorrow tells us we are finished. Yet healing can come late, and often it comes quietly, like a hand slipping into yours when you thought no one would ever reach again. It reminds us that family isn't always by blood, it's by the choice to stay, to love, and to begin anew. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to carry its truth into your own life. Never believe it's too late for second chances. And here on None, Wild West Saga, we share more stories just like this of resilience, dignity, and love that comes when least expected. Please subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Share and comment below. Would you like to see what became of this widow and the twin girls? Or do you hope for more tales of love found on the frontier? Your words matter, and they help keep the circle of hope alive.